So guys, we're going to be taking a look at JavaScript in a nutshell in this video. So a concise overview of everything in JavaScript. So by that, what do I mean? We're going to be looking at variables, data types, template literals, operators, control flow. So actually, these are all the concepts you are going to be encountering in JavaScript, and we're going to be taking an overview of all these concepts in this tutorial. Asynchronous JavaScript, and we're going to take a look at all of them in this chronological order from the basic concepts to more advanced concepts. So I'm going to love to have you on this journey, and you can just hit that subscribe, let's say the like button if you are already enjoying these concepts. Okay, so what is JavaScript? So JavaScript is a versatile programming language primarily used for web development, and as we know, it's used for making interactive, dynamic content websites with functionalities in them. So JavaScript is supported by all major web browsers and used on both the client side, which is in your browsers, and in on server side as well. So when I talk of that, what I'm trying to say is JavaScript. With JavaScript, you can use JavaScript to create applications that run in browsers. So all browsers, Chrome, Edge, Safari, all browsers support JavaScript. And the way you create these web apps is using frameworks like React, Angular, Vue. These are the main frameworks. There are others like SvelteKit and others which are just coming up of recent Solid.js, but these are the main ones. You also have cross-platform mobile applications which you can use JavaScript to build. And building cross-platform mobile applications with JavaScript, you use frameworks like React Native, Ionic, and some others, but these are the main ones. Then you can also use JavaScript to build desktop applications. Yeah, so you can use Electron to build desktop apps for using JavaScript, and there are others, but I'm just looking at the main ones in. I just showed the main ones here. So this video is just going to be something like a refresher for intermediate to advanced devs. So they're basically going to know many things in this video, but it's just going to be like a refresher for them to make that brain muscle. And I'm going to be touching on everything in JavaScript in this tutorial. So you just know you are going to have everything at least. I'm going to be covering everything in this tutorial. It's a perfect tutorial for intermediate JavaScript devs and those who are already comfortable with other programming languages, because I'm going to be going through all the core concepts in JavaScript in this tutorial. Then the tutorial is for those who are completely new to programming. Watching this video is just going to be important to them because they are going to see all what is in JavaScript, all the concepts that come to JavaScript, but they are going to need to check out some full tutorials on in-depth tutorials on these different concepts, because I'm not going to be going really in-depth in this video. So with that out of the way, we're just going to get quickly started. The main way to include JavaScript in your project, you can either use this script tag with the source attribute, and here you precise the file you want to include, which is your JavaScript file. In this case, file.js is my JavaScript file, and here it is. So in this file, you precise here, you are basically going to be defining, creating all the different, writing your JavaScript in this file. So that's one way of specifying it. The other way is to use the put in your JavaScript directly into this script tag without using the source attribute. So if I quickly comment this, so you see that in this case, for example, I'm declaring a variable and initializing it here, and I have this control block, this if control block, where I'm checking if it's 5. I'm printing the value. A has a value of 5 to the console. So this is how you do a print in JavaScript. When you use console log, it's going to print it to the terminal, just like you use console, you use printf, scanf, and print in different programming languages. Console log is the equivalent in JavaScript. It's going to print these values to the console. So this is another way of using JavaScript. But the problem is, if you use this method, your JavaScript may contain much code, and you don't want it to be mixed up with your HTML in the same file. It's going to make things too cumbersome and complicated to look at. So in most cases, this is the recommended way of using JavaScript in your code. You create a JavaScript file separate, and you just link to that file here inside the script using the source. Okay. With that out of the way, we are going to get now into all the other concepts we're talking of in JavaScript. So as we saw, we talked of variables, talk of functions, and all those. We are going to be looking at them quickly. So for variables, first of all, the first thing you need to note is how you do comments in JavaScript. Similar to other programming languages, you use this double slash, and we use the double slash. So you see that all these lines where I have double slash in front of the text, they are going to be commented. So the code is not going to be executed. And you notice these red squiggly lines under different things. For now, just consider they are not errors. It's just because I'm repeating the same variables in the same file to explain the different concepts that you are seeing these red lines, but just ignore them. They are not errors. Everything is fine. So yeah, okay. So the first thing, variables. Variables in JavaScript, the first thing is declaration of variables. How do you declare variables? You either use the var, let, const keyword. These are the main keywords used to declare variables in JavaScript. This one was the old way, the var, but nowadays most of us use let and const. Let is just a way of declaring a variable that it can be initialized afterwards. So this variable y can change its value in the future, but const cannot be changed. Const is basically constant. When you use constant, you mean you don't want to change that variable in the future. Okay, initialization. So after declaring the variables here, you can initialize them. So we declared x in this line, on this line here, and we're initializing x to 10. We declared y, which is a variable, we're initializing here, and we're initializing z as well. Okay. Declaration and initialization. So you can do both declaration and initialization on the same line. You declare the variable and initialize its value at once. You declare, you initialize its variable, you declare, initialize. So variables, as we know, are just like containers. We create a variable, you want to store something in that variable, so it's like a container for a particular something. And for that, there can be different data types which we are going to look at down here. So before that, let's take a look at variable v assignment. So you see that, for example, you have let x equal to 10. I can reassign the value of x. You can change its value to 20, and this is possible because x here was declared using this let keyword. Let meaning that I can change its value afterwards, and if you print the value of x, it's going to display the new value of x, which is 20, because you change the value of x here. But if you use the const keyword instead of let, and you decide to change the value in the future, it's not going to be possible. You are going to get an error, because when you declare a constant, you have declared y to be a constant, means you don't want to be able to change it later. So if you try changing it, it's going to be an error. Okay, data types. Data types here, you have different data types in JavaScript, and the main data types are number, for any number, which can be a normal integer, it can be a floating point number with decimal values. You can use this number to declare them. You have string, which is normal string, characters combined together, a long string or a character. You can put them into this string. You have boolean, which can either be true or false. You have array. So an array is basically a data type that can store many values. So in this case, you see we are storing many integers in this array, 1, 2, 3. You can store strings as well in an array, or any other data type. You can store objects, booleans in an array. Okay, you have objects, which is basically key value per data type. So objects are used to represent like an identity of something. For example, you can declare that a person is an object, and what you are going to do is you can give a name attribute, you give a value, you give an age attribute or another attribute, and you give a value. You can continue including the key value pairs inside these objects, opening and curly braces. You have the null data type, so you can give a variable a value of null, meaning that you are storing no value in it. And you have undefined. When you declare a variable and you have not yet initialized it, its value is undefined. Okay, so that's for variables now. And data types, you have, for example, here we are declaring a constant pi to have this value. So you see that the understanding now here is, what do you declare to be, when do you use which data type for declaring variables. In this case, we are using pi. We are saying that pi should be a constant, because we know that pi is not going to change in the future. So we want the value of pi to be fixed. That way, if someone goes somewhere in the code and try to change the value of pi to 3.14, it's not going to work. It's going to error because we want the value of the constant pi to be fixed. And you also see this other case where we are declaring this person as a constant. So the idea here is we're using the object data type to declare this person, because we know that the person can have a name, he can have an age. So basically, using an object is the appropriate data type for creating a person. And we can change the person's name, like person.name. We can change the value. Person, you can also, if you decide now to like change person to an empty object, it's not going to work because we declared person to be a constant, so you cannot change it to be an empty object. Okay. Template literals. So template literals was a new addition to the ES6 features. So it's a new addition to JavaScript and it's very important. It helps you work with strings and do some computation in strings. So a simple application of template literals. If you have a variable, for example, name, you declare it using the let keyword, you give it a value of John. You have age, you give it a value of 30, which is a number. You can decide to create another variable message, which is a string in this case. And what you do is you want to be able to output these other variables inside this string. And basically, the way you could do it initially was using concatenation of strings, using using plus and separating the strings. But with template literals, you can just use this dollar curly braces and you put a variable name here. So it's going to replace this dollar curly braces and name with this value John, and it's going to replace this dollar curly braces age with the value 30. So basically, the output of this string, when you print out this string, is going to be my name is John and I am 30 years of age, because he has replaced this with the name and he has replaced this with the age. So that's how you use template literals. It's very useful when you are going to get a hand, so we are going to get used to it. Okay, multi-line strings. You can use template literals also for multi-line strings. So you see that you can have some strings here. If you hit enter on your keyboard and have another string on the next line and type another string on the next line, and we have all these strings inside this template literal opening and closing quotes. So what happens is, if you console log this string, it's basically going to display it exactly like the way you typed it. So all the tabs, all the enters you hit on your keyboard are going to be considered, and it's going to output it exactly like the way you typed. Initially, if you don't use these template strings and you decide to use the normal curly opening and closing quotes, what's going to happen is these other strings are going to be moved to the same line, and you are going to read all of this is going to be on the same line. But with template literals, it helps you format the text the way you want it to be formatted and have it used as the way you formatted initially. Okay, expression and values. So expression, and you can use template literals to also compute some expression with values. So you have a and b to be 5 and 10. Then your result, you want the result with the sum of a and b. So it's going to replace dollar curly braces a dollar curly braces b with 5 and 10. So it's going to output the sum of 5 and 10 is, and it's going to replace, now you see here, dollar curly braces a plus b. So it's basically going to do maths inside this template literals, inside this curly braces here. So it can help you do some maths also, and you see that all this is inline. So it's doing all these computations inside this quotation marks open and close, which is very important with template literals, reducing the number of lines or code required to do some operations. Okay, now you have operators in JavaScript. So operators are the building blocks of expressions, because you can basically perform maths in JavaScript, which is pretty common for any programming language. You need to be able to do maths, and you see that you can use the plus sign, you can use multiplication, you can use division, you can also use modulos, which is percentage. So you can use modulos and subtraction as well. So you can combine all these. You see here, opening braces, curly, closing, divided by 1000. So that's basically maths in JavaScript, and it's normal. You can also do comparison. Like here, you are comparing that x should be equal to y, and if x is equal to y here, it's going to store it as true in this boolean. So this value is going to be a boolean which is computed by summing x and y. Then you can also have this logical or and, which is checking whether a and b. So it checks if a and b. So if a is true and b is true, then it's going to store true inside this variable. And if any of them is false, then it's going to store false here. So that's basically some. So you don't need to bother about understanding all of this in this tutorial. I'll create some example tutorials where I actually go into detail into all of this when working on a project with them, and you're going to better understand them. Okay, let's continue. And if you are already getting some value from this tutorial, consider hitting that subscribe button because more interesting content is coming on. Okay, so control flow in JavaScript. So control flow is very important, and this is what um 80% of your code, I can say this is basically what you are programming in any programming language you encounter, is being able to understand how to combine logic. Basically, that's logic in particular. So you are going to be evaluating different situations. For example, in this case, we start with a number, a variable that's a number of which is 10, and we are basically doing some logic here. So you are going to use if blocks and while loops, for loops, and all these are going to be very common in programming languages. So you will evaluate if the number is greater than 0. We console log that the number is greater than 0. But if the number is not greater than 0, in the else condition, we check if the number is instead less than 0. If it's less than 0, we console log the number is negative. Then if none of these conditions is met, if the number is neither less than 0 nor greater than 0, meaning that the number is equal to 0, so we are going to console log the number is 0. So this is pretty common using if else in programming languages, and JavaScript is no exception to that. So ternaries are basically ways of doing if else in one line, and it makes your code really short. So we start with a variable of age which is 20, and we have this variable message which is going to store the result of the evaluation of this ternary. So what happens is we check if the age is greater than or equal to 18. Then what is after this question mark, first question mark, is what is evaluated for the if condition, if the if condition passes. So if the age is greater than or equal to 18, it's going to return you are an adult, and it's going to store it in message. On the other hand, if the age is not greater than or equal to 18, is going to return you are not an adult and store it inside the string message. So basically this message variable is a string, and it's going to hold either you are an adult if the age is greater than 18, or you are not an adult if it's not greater than or equal to 18. Then you also have while loops. So whiles are very common, and you use whiles in situations where you want to execute, keep on executing the code inside the while block until the condition here is no more satisfied. So while this integer I is less than 5, it's going to continue executing this code, and it's going to be incrementing I till I becomes greater than 5, greater than or equal to 5. Then it's going to break out of this loop. So the main thing you need to note with the while loop is that you have to ensure that there's some code inside the while loop that is basically going to change the variable that you are checking here. It's going to modify that variable such that at a certain point in time, this is not going to be true again. If not, you are going to end up in an infinite loop which is going to crash your code. So you have to ensure that you have some line, some expression inside the while block which is changing this variable here such that at a certain point in time, this condition is not yet met. It's no longer met. Okay, so you have the for loop. The for loop is very common for iterating a known number of times. In this case, we know that once we iterate till the value of I is greater than or equal to 5. So we start with I equal to 0, and why I is less than or equal to 5. So why the value of I is less than or equal to 5, we keep on incrementing I, and we execute the code inside here. So it's going to console log I is equal to 0, I is equal to 1, I is equal to 2, I equal to 3, I equal to 4. Then it's going to stop executing this for loop. So that's pretty common. The switch case is something I like using very much, and it's something most people neglect and they don't use because they find themselves using the if condition most of the time. So which the switch case can easily help you evaluate situations where you are checking just one variable. So that's a common use case for the switch. The if else, you can combine different logical operators here like the or and the and to compute to basically check for many expressions inside this if. But the switch case, you can use it on only one variable. Like in this case, what you are doing is you're checking for the day variable and you're ensuring you are checking for the different cases. In the case the day is Monday, you execute this block of code and you break. When you break, it basically skips all these switch cases. So it executes only one of them. In the case day is equal to Tuesday, it's going to console log it's Tuesday and it's going to break. So it's not going to execute any of these other ones. So with the switch case, it executes only one of these switch cases when the variable is equal to the case variable you put here. Okay, functions. So functions, as we know, something super important, and I don't know how you basically you'll be using functions almost everywhere in your program because it's what's going to help you separate your code into logical blocks. So you can have a function that does a particular thing. That's basically how they define a function. A function is used to perform a specific task in your code. So you can have a function that adds two numbers. This one is very simple example. And basically what you just do is you take those two numbers x, y, you add them and you return the result. You can have a function that does multiplication of two numbers, basically two variables. So in this case, you do the multiplication of the two and you return the result. So when the user wants to call this function, the way you call the function is you you put in the function name. So you have add numbers, then you put the first variable, which is going to be x1 in this case. So x is going to take the value of 1 and 4, y is going to take the value of 4. So you are adding these two numbers and you are returning the result, which is going to be 5. Multiply numbers 2 TV. So we pass 2 TV, x is going to be 2, y is going to be 3. So it's going to return the multiplication of 2 times 3, which is 6. Okay. So you see that basically this way two different ways of doing the same thing. If you notice, this one used the function keyword, then the function name. In this other case, we are using arrow functions. So this is the new syntax of defining a function in JavaScript, and it's very common. You are going to come across it most of the time. So use const, which as we saw is a keyword for declaring a variable. So you have now um, multiply numbers, which is the name of the function. Then you have equal to, you put the parameters here. Then you have this arrow equal to greater than, which is the arrow. That's why we call it arrow functions. Then now you have now the function inside here. So you can either do this or do this. It's just the same way of different ways of doing the same thing. Functions and variable scope. So this is another thing you need to also know. The way variables are scoped. So if you have a function here, in this case, scope example is the name of our function. This opening and curly braces is where the function starts and ends. So inside here, we declare a variable var x equal to 10. So, and we are saying here that this function is a scoped variable. So basically, it's scoped, meaning that it's stored in the memory of your JavaScript program and it knows that this variable exists. So when you have another block of code, and we'll talk of blocks, a block is denoted by this opening and curly braces. So if I say, for example, the if block, it's basically this block where we have this opening and closing curly braces around the if. So what happens is any variable you declare and initialize inside this this scope, which is this curly braces here, is known only inside this curly braces. So once you go out of this curly braces, you can no longer use that function. So since as we declared and initialize y and z inside these curly braces, if we come out here and decide and say we want to console log y and z, it's not going to be possible because you notice that we're trying to console log y and z out of the curly braces where they were defined. So they were defined inside these curly braces, but we're trying to console log them out of the curly braces. That cannot work. So in the other case, console locking x out of this curly braces is fine because you notice that x was declared and initialized out of these curly braces. So it's fine for us to try to console log x out of the curly braces. And this is how we call the function as usual. So, okay, array functions. Array functions are very useful in JavaScript, and I think this is also one of the main features that puts developers in different categories. Those that have their life easy and those that have complicated lives actually. So those that know array functions, basically life becomes very easy to them because they can achieve almost any complex task in JavaScript, which most of the times you are going to be working on arrays by being able to combine these different array functions with increasing complexities. So for example, let's say we start with an array of numbers 1 to 5. An easy way to iterate through this array of numbers, instead of using the basic for loop where you use for I equals 0, I less than or equal to the numbers dot length I plus plus, is to use this for each. So you notice that you can just take the name of the array, numbers dot for each, and when you use for each, you now create now a function. For each takes the function you want to call. So basically you now pass the this variable you pass into the function denotes the variable at each iteration. So number is going to store each number for every iteration. So in the first iteration of this for each loop, number is going to be 1. The next iteration is going to be 2. So basically this is a short way of doing the for I equals 0, I less than or equal to, and you console log each variable for every iteration. So you have the next one, which is here we are using the map. So map permits us iterate through each element in the array, and you can basically convert the element for the iteration into another element. So as we are iterating through these elements in this numbers array, we want to double, that's we want to multiply each number by 2 and return a new array, which is a multiplication, which was created by having each of these numbers being multiplied by 2. So we iterate, it takes 1, it multiplies 1 by 2, multiplies 2 by 2, 3 by 2, 4 by 2, and 5 by 2. And the returned array is an array that contains, which is an array that has all these values being multiplied by 2. Okay, we have filter. So filter helps us, as the name indicates. Filter means it grabs specific values in the array based on a certain condition it precise. So it's going to filter this array, and in this case we are trying to filter the array based on the condition that the number that it iterates over, mode 2, should be equal to 0. So we are basically saying that the number is an even number when the modulus is 0, meaning that there's no remainder when we divide by 2. So it's going to return us all even numbers in this array, which are 2 and 4. Okay, the next one is reduce, and reduce basically performs some complex operations in the array. In most cases, I don't even use reduce, though it's very important, but you get to, the main thing is with reduce is that what happens is you start with an initial value, and the operations are basically accumulated in this value. So what happens is, for this case, the initial value is 0, and what we are doing is, for every iteration we start iterating over the array, and we take this initial value 0 plus the first number is going to always be the value at every iteration. So the first iteration, it takes 0 plus 1, it sums it and stores. So we have 1. After it takes now the accumulated value, which was 1 for the initial iteration, 1 plus 2 is 3, it stores 3. Then it takes now 3 plus 3, 6, it stores it. Then after it takes 6 plus 4, 10, it stores it. So basically that's how the reduce works. I'll just give you a brief overview of all this. Then you have the find. As the name indicates, find helps you find a particular element in that array, and this one is very practical. So let's say you want to find a number which is greater than 3. You want to find a number which is greater than 3. So you are just going to take this numbers array, you call find, you take numbers dot find, and you want it to return the number greater than 3. So it's going to return the first number that it finds, which is greater than 3. in the array. The first number that matches this condition is going to be returned, else it's going to return null if it does not find any number. Okay, that's it for array functions, and I invite you to take a good look at array functions, because it's something you are going to be using everywhere, and if you don't know, it's going to basically be a pain for you if you don't know that. Okay, objects. So objects in JavaScript, as the name indicates, and in other programming languages, an object is, as the name indicates, just creating different kinds of things by combining different properties. Like you see, for example, here, a person has his name, he has an age, he has an occupation. So you create an object of type person. So you can change the person's name by doing, so you can console log different properties in this object by just using this dot after the name of the object, and then you put the name of the property. So you see person dot name returns is going to print the person's name John. Person dot age is going to print his name age 30. Person dot occupation is going to print his occupation developer. So modifying object properties. So to modify the property, just take the name of the object, then you put a dot and the name of the property you want to modify. In this case, age. You want to change age from 30 to 35, so you just put 35 here. It's going to update it. Person dot occupation engineer. In this case, you want to change the occupation from developer to engineer. Okay, adding new properties to the person. You take the person dot location. Notice that if you look here, location did not exist in this object. But you can add a new property by just putting dot. You create the name of the property you want to add. They put New York, so it's going to include location as one of the properties inside this person object. Then if you console log, it's going to console log all the new properties you added and the updated properties to show their updated values. Spread operator. So very, very important. Some other very new things to JavaScript, which I mentioned in a certain tutorial, in a previous tutorial where I was talking of the things you need to take note of learning as a front-end developer to when progressing your JavaScript career. Things also like spread operators are very important. So what does a spread help you do? And the good thing is that you have some of these very powerful things in JavaScript that you don't have in other programming languages. And that's what makes JavaScript very, very, very nice. So you have an array 1, array 2. You put these three dots in front of array 1. What it does is it's going to take out all these elements in the array and place them inside here one by one. You put three dots inside before array 2 is going to take out all these elements and place them inside here one by one. So you end up with an array that's values 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So he has basically spread, as the name indicates, spread. He has spread out these values inside this other array. So the combined array now has all these values inside here, just like magic. If you wanted to do that the ordinary way, what you do is you are going to iterate through all these elements in this array, and you are going to add them to the new array by pushing them into the new array as you iterate through them. So you basically have a for loop that iterates over the first array, adds it, and another for loop that iterates over the next array and adds it. And that's very cumbersome. To do something you can just do by spreading these values directly into the array. Okay, you can also spread not only arrays as you see there, you can also spread objects. So you can take an object that has different properties. Here you have A, B, and you have an object with properties C, D, and you spread also the properties of that object into another object. So it has, you see here, we're spreading the properties of this object into this other object, and that's also very interesting. You see that spreading is used for both objects and arrays. So at the end of the day, end up now with an object that has the properties A, B, C, D from objects that just their individual properties of A, B, and C, D. Okay, you also have destructuring. So destructuring is also another very interesting thing. And basically, many things in JavaScript are interesting. That's why I invite you to just at least know all of them. You just need to know them, even if you need to do some referring back to them afterwards, but you need to know them at least. So destructuring, you have the variable here, which is an array, a numbers array, and you want to create variables from this numbers array. So you don't want to do, for example, you say let A equal to numbers 0, let B equal numbers 1, let C equals numbers 2. You want to just have these variables A, B, C directly from the array. What you do is you just say let, you create, you use the array, the open square brackets here, close it. I put your variables here, put equal to the name of the variable, and basically you have all this. You have now 1 stored in A, you have 2 stored in B, and you have 3 stored in C, just like magic. And you can use those variables in your code. The same thing for objects. You can also spread, you can also destructure objects. So as you see here, you want to have name, age, and occupation variables, which are actually these values here. What you do is you open your curly braces, open and close, you put the variables, then you take this person, you put it after the equal to sign, and you basically now just have John stored in name, 30 stored in age, and developer stored in occupation. Okay, classes. Classes, as they say, classes are the blueprints for objects. So if you want to create objects of a particular type, in this case, let's say you want to create rectangle objects. So you create a class called rectangle. You have a constructor which is inside. This constructor is basically what you use to create, what you use to construct the object. Like you say, you initialize to construct the object, you use the constructor. You pass the properties, it takes the properties and it sets those properties here. So the object's width and height are those you pass in when you are creating the object. Get area is a method that you have defined in this object, in this class. So you can call this method on any object or any instance of this class. So for example, the way you create a rectangle object is you say you give the variable a name, use this keyword new, but you are not forced to use this new, it's optional. Create you give the class name, then you pass in the constructor parameters. So in this case, the constructor said you need to pass in a width and a height. So you pass in the width 5, you pass in the height 3, and it's going to create you a rectangle object with a width of 5 and a height of 3. And if you console log, and if you want to get now the area of this rectangle you just created, you just call this method get area, which you define inside this class, and it's going to return you the multiplication of the width and the height, which is going to be 3 times 5 in this case, and it's going to return you 15 as the area of the rectangle. The same thing. Okay, now we have inheritance in classes as well, and inheritance, as the name indicates, you want a square, and you know a square is a particular instance of a rectangle. So you create this constructor now, and what the constructor is doing is you are creating a square. Since as when you want to create a square, you need just one property. The width and height of a square are the same. So when you pass in one side of the square, it knows the other side. So it's going to create, it's basically using now the super, in this case, which is the constructor, which is the constructor for the parent, in this case, which is the rectangle, and it's passing in the side twice. So it's basically creating now a rectangle. A square is a rectangle with the width and height which are the same. So it's basically creating a rectangle now with the same side length for the width and height. And you create now an instance of the square class by passing just one value, which is what this constructor demands. And when you do that, it's going to create now a rectangle with the same width and height. And if you do square dot get area, it's going to do 4 times 4, which is 16. Okay, methods in a class. So a class can have many methods, and some methods can be static and some methods can be normal methods. So a normal method is, for example, this one get area, which is doing the math.py, which is the value of pi in the math library. So it's basically doing math.py times math.power, means it's going to take this value raised to the power this other value. So it's going to do the radius squared. So it's basically doing pi radius squared. This is basically getting the area of the circle by doing pi radius squared. And you also have this static method. This static method in the class create from diameter. So you can also create you the circle from a diameter. You know the it's doing that by returning the diameter divided by creating a new circle with diameter over 2. So basically you have this, you have using static methods and using normal methods. The difference is you can just create a new circle by, yeah, you create a circle normally. If you want to call a normal method, you call the method on the instance of that class, which is the object itself. So you can call this method on the instance of the class. But when you want to call the starting method, you have to call it on the class itself. So you take the circle. You see that in this case, the circle is the capital circle, which is actually the name of this circle class. So you are calling the starting methods on the class itself, while you call the, the normal methods on an on an instance of the class. Okay, getters and setters in a class. So getters just help you get a particular property. Like for example, you want to get name, you create get name is just going to return you the name, this dot name. And to set, a setters help you set a particular property. So set name is going to take the value that I want to set and it's going to set it to that property. So that's a setter. Okay, create the object. You can call now you can console log the person's name and it's going to lock you the person's name. So it's just basically okay. Working now with the DOM in JavaScript, you can manipulate the DOM, the document object model, which is the structure of your HTML code. So you can manipulate the structure of your HTML code and change the look and feel of a web page by manipulating the DOM. So the first things you need to know about are DOM selection, the way you select elements in your DOM. And in the upcoming tutorials I'm going to be creating, I'm going to be working on many projects with JavaScript, simple examples to help you see how JavaScript works. So working with the DOM, you can get an element in your web page by the element's ID. And if you don't know about HTML, you are completely new to HTML, I have full tutorial series on this channel about HTML, and you can learn about at least what an element ID is, because those are some basics. You need to know about classes also as well. So you can get an element from the DOM by the element's class name, you passing the class name. And you can use query selector, which is an API, a JavaScript API that helps you select elements as if you were using jQuery. So if you do query selector and you select, use this identifier, this number sign here is, this number sign means the ID. So it's the same thing like doing get element by ID and passing the string ID here. Using this one does the same thing using query selector. You need to specify this number sign. Okay, so those are ways of selecting DOM elements and manipulating DOM elements. So you can change the DOM elements. Okay, here you have element by ID. You can change the elements inner HTML. You can change the element styles by using the syntax as you see here. So you can also create new elements like AG, for example. You can change the elements text content. You can create, you can add a new element to the DOM. And you have event handlers, very important. Handling click events, for example. You pass in the function you want to execute when the user clicks on a particular element. After you have selected the element by ID, you add an event listener that listens for when the user clicks on that element. Then you fire this function. You can add other event listeners like hover, mouse enter, double click, and there are many others. Okay, asynchronous JavaScript. So this is where you start working with asynchronous code. So we talk of asynchrony. It's actually code that does not execute at the same time. So it's code that can take some time to execute. So you don't know exactly when it's going to finish, but it may take some time, unlike the normal code flow I used to. So with asynchronous JavaScript, you have things like callbacks. So this was the first way of doing asynchronous in JavaScript, using callbacks. So with a callback, what you do is you need to pass in a certain function, which is your callback function that you want to execute after the asynchronous code has finished running. So for example, you have we're using set timeout here just to emulate asynchronous code execution, and we're saying that set timeout is going to execute after the time specified here. So after 2000 seconds, run the callback function and take in data received. So when the user now calls fetch data, passing in his callback function, he now precises what he wants to do with the data that has been received from this callback function. In this case, he just wants to console log the data. Okay, promises were introduced after callback functions to simplify things a lot better. So you have the syntax of creating a promise. This new promise is the way you create the promise. So the promise is actually an object. So new promise, you create the promise and you pass in a function that has this resolve and reject parameters. And these are actually obligatory. You pass in this resolve, reject, and you define what you should do with the resolve and reject, what should happen on resolve and rejection of the asynchronous code. So in your set timeout, you now call resolve, passing in the data, in this case data received. So it's basically going to return this when the promise resolves. That's after the promise has ended. It's going to return this, and in the other case, if there's an error, it's going to pass in it's going to call the reject function, but it was not defined here. So the way you use the promise is you call the promise, the promise method, in this case the method that is returning the promise. Then this dot then is actually what takes a function that is going to be called when the promise resolves. That's when the promise finishes. So it's going to call this function, and this function actually takes in the data. This data is actually what was passed in here when the promise resolves. So in this case, we are just console logging the data. But in the other case, when there's an error, we are just console logging the error. Okay, that's for async await. Async await is the latest, and it's very easy because it helps you chain many asynchronous requests and makes working with asynchronous requests very easy. So async await, what you do is you have this async keyword and you need to have the await. It's await you need to use await when, like for example, if you have here async, you have await here, then this is async, which is you must put here. These two keywords go together. So you have this asynchronous function, which is saying that this function is going to take some time to execute. And what you do is you have this await keyword, which is saying that this variable is going to contain the data that is returned after this promise resolves. So when this promise resolves, that's when it calls this data return, this data received. When the promise resolves after 2000 seconds, we're going to get the data in this data variable and we're going to console log the data. In the other case, we're going to console log the error. So error handling in JavaScript, you just use try catch as in many other programming languages. Try is where you put your block of code, and when if any error is encountered in any of these blocks of code, it's going to console log the error here in the catch block. Okay. And working with modules. So modules helps you separate your code like you have in some other programming languages. So what you do is you have the first file. So you have different files. You have a certain file where you have some code written, and to export a particular functionality, you need to use this export keyword. So export, in this case, we're exporting a constant with a string hello world, and in this other case, we're exporting a function. So when you export some particular functionalities from a file or a module, you import them in another module or file using this import keyword. So I'm now importing back this message and greet function, constant and functions from the first module. So basically, this first module or file had a name of module1.js. So I'm importing these functionalities from that first module which was the file module1.js in the same directory. Notice this relative part here. Okay, so we can now console log message and console log and call the function greet John, which are going to behave the way we expect as if they were defined in the same file. JavaScript browser APIs. Okay, so JavaScript has powerful APIs, and The browser, some of them, you have the first one, which is the geolocation API. So you can basically get geolocation, the coordinates of a particular user's web browser. That's in this case, if you do position.coordinates.latitude, position.coordinates.longitude. So it's going to get the latitude and longitude of the device on which the code is running, and you can use the geolocation API to do that. You have the fetch API, which is helps you do XHR requests very efficiently. So if you want to do a fetch request, you want to get some data from a certain remote server. You can use this fetch. You put in the URL of the remote server here. Then you have this dot then. So you basically see that who are working your promises. Say dot then when it gets the data as response, you do response.json to convert it to JSON format. Then after that, you console log the data. You have converted the data to JSON format. If there was any error, you print the error. So that's basically working with the fetch API. You can also do post and delete, and basically all HTTP request methods can be performed with the fetch API. Okay, then browser API is local storage. So local storage helps you have some storage at the level of your web browser, not going fast with your databases. You can basically use the local storage of your web browser to store some information, but take note, it should not be confidential information. You can just save some token information and very basic information for a user in the local storage of his web browser. So in this case, the way you use the local storage API is you have this set items method, which you can pass in the key here, which is the username, and the value here, which is the what you want to store in this key. So we are storing John as the person's username, and to get the particular value back from the local storage, you have this get items method in which you pass in the key, and it's going to return you the corresponding value. So it's going to return back John inside this username variable. Then you have local storage dot remove items to delete the key value pair from the local storage. And you also have some other very useful JavaScript APIs like the WebSockets API for handling real-time data between client and servers, and you have this web RTC API for video calls and some other stuffs. So those are some very important things in JavaScript, and I think I basically walked through all the important concepts here in JavaScript as we saw in our roadmap. I've basically gone through all of this. And I think that's it, guys, for this tutorial. If you know you got some value from this tutorial, I'll just leave a like and subscribe to this channel because more interesting content is coming on. As I started with JavaScript, there's always going to be much and content which I think is very going to be important for you guys, intermediate to advanced developers, and also beginners because you have much to learn. And I'm going to see you in the next tutorial.